You're with us? Look.
Come.
Come here. Okay, you want to open this?
Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni arrived at court for a mandatory settlement conference, a moment that sparked speculation about whether their legal battle might finally be nearing an end. On Popcorn Planet, Andy Senior welcomed legal experts Ron Zambrano and Greg Dahl to break down the situation, and their insights quickly made one thing clear. This appearance didn't necessarily mean a resolution was close. Instead, it reflected a standard legal process where both parties are required by the court to meet and attempt, at least formally, to resolve their dispute in good faith. Despite the structured setting, the atmosphere surrounding the case felt anything but routine. Reports suggested the tension in the courtroom was intense, with the weight of the situation bearing heavily on Blake Lively, whose claims were now being scrutinized as potentially weak. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni remained firm, unwilling to back down, turning the dispute into what appeared to be a battle of willpower as much as a legal fight. The pressure extended beyond the courtroom, with speculation about the emotional toll on those involved, including Ryan Reynolds, as the case threatened to escalate into a highly public and damaging trial. Legal experts emphasized that mandatory settlement conferences are often procedural rather than productive. They require both sides to prepare statements, attend in person, and engage in discussions, but they don't guarantee any actual agreement. These sessions can also be extremely costly and exhausting, draining both financial and emotional resources while sometimes doing little to resolve the underlying conflict. As both parties arrived at the courthouse, their public appearances reflected the gravity of the situation. Blake Lively moved through the media crowd in silence, her composed demeanor masking the pressure she was under, while Justin Baldoni appeared equally reserved alongside his wife, Emily. Their lack of public statements seemed deliberate, projecting calm professionalism while concealing whatever tensions lay beneath. From a legal standpoint, the outlook for Lively appeared increasingly uncertain. Greg Dahl noted that if he were in her position, he would consider settling quickly due to the perceived weakness of her claims. There was also discussion that the judge might dismiss significant portions of the case during summary judgment, leaving both sides potentially heading toward appeals instead of trial. This uncertainty made negotiations particularly difficult, as it's hard to reach a compromise when one side still believes it can win outright. The dynamics of the settlement conference itself added another layer of tension. Unlike typical cases where opposing sides may remain separate, there was a strong possibility that Lively and Baldoni would face each other directly, at least briefly, to present their positions. Afterward, they would likely be separated into different rooms while the magistrate judge moved between them, attempting to broker a deal, complicating matters further. The judge had not yet revealed his stance on key legal motions, deliberately maintaining uncertainty. This strategic ambiguity increased pressure on both sides, forcing them to weigh the risks of continuing the fight against the possibility of reaching a settlement. For Blake Lively, in particular, the stakes were especially high, as an unfavorable outcome could have serious consequences for her career and public image. The judge's handling of the situation demonstrated a calculated and highly strategic use of judicial pressure, effectively turning the settlement conference into a controlled environment where every moment carried significant emotional and legal weight. What might appear from the outside as a routine procedural step was, in reality, an intense and nerve-wracking experience for those directly involved, with each decision, pause, and interaction carrying potentially career-altering consequences. While the idea of Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni stepping aside to resolve matters privately might seem like a reasonable or even hopeful possibility, legal experts made it clear that such an outcome was extremely unlikely in a case of this magnitude. In high-stakes litigation, attorneys maintain strict oversight and control of all communication, ensuring that nothing is said or agreed upon outside carefully structured legal parameters. As a result, any expectation of a candid, personal conversation between the two parties was effectively eliminated, replaced instead by a rigid, attorney-driven framework designed to protect legal positions rather than foster emotional resolution. Behind the scenes, the pressure on Lively appeared to be mounting rapidly, with legal analysts strongly emphasizing the importance of crafting an exit strategy before the situation deteriorated further. Her case, already facing skepticism, was increasingly viewed as vulnerable, with the possibility of partial or even complete dismissal becoming a realistic threat. This created a deeply challenging position for her, forcing a delicate balancing act between protecting her public image, managing legal risks, and coping with the personal stress of an escalating dispute. At the same time, Justin Baldoni's position appeared notably more secure. If his legal team believed that the claims against him lacked strength, there would be little motivation to settle, allowing him to maintain a firm and unwavering stance. This imbalance only served to deepen the stalemate, as one side faced growing urgency while the other remained comparatively The structure of the settlement conference itself further reinforced this dynamic. Rather than encouraging open, collaborative discussion, the process operated as a tightly controlled system of shuttle diplomacy, in which a magistrate judge moved between separate rooms, carrying proposals, counteroffers, and strategic messages. This physical and procedural separation underscored the depth of the conflict, preventing any direct emotional engagement and reinforcing the adversarial nature of the proceedings. Even the brief moments where both parties were brought together, such as during initial presentations, were far from cooperative, instead serving as formal opportunities to outline opposing narratives in a high-pressure setting that often heightened tension rather than diffused it. Adding another layer of intensity was the magistrate judge's significant authority within the process. Unlike a traditional mediator, the judge possessed the power to enforce participation, issue directives, and even impose consequences for This elevated the stakes considerably, as both sides were required to engage seriously and strategically, fully aware that their actions could have immediate legal repercussions. For Lively, this likely meant confronting difficult and unfiltered assessments of her case from a neutral authority figure, a scenario that can be far more impactful and, at times, unsettling than guidance from one's own legal team. Compounding the pressure was the uncertainty surrounding potential judicial rulings, without clear insight into how key motions might be decided. Both parties were forced to navigate negotiations in a state of ambiguity, weighing the risks of continuing the fight against the potential benefits of settling. Legal experts pointed out that while the public often forgets the details of disputes that are quietly resolved, a prolonged and highly public trial can leave a lasting imprint on reputations, particularly in the entertainment industry where public perception plays a crucial role. This reality added yet another layer of urgency, especially for someone in Lively's position, where long-term career implications were closely tied to how the situation unfolded in the public eye. Meanwhile, Baldoni's apparent confidence only intensified the imbalance in the negotiation dynamic. A party that believes it holds a strong legal advantage has little incentive to compromise, often resulting in prolonged deadlock and increased pressure on the opposing side. Financial considerations, including the possibility of insurance coverage supporting one side's legal costs, may have further influenced the strategies at play, shaping decisions around whether to settle or continue litigating. Additionally, the role of legal counsel introduced another layer of complexity, as attorneys, while acting in their clients' best interests, may not always present the harshest realities as bluntly as a judge might. This made the magistrate's perspective particularly critical, as it had the potential to cut through optimism or strategic bias and force a more grounded evaluation of the situation. Ultimately, the settlement conference evolved into far more than a simple attempt at resolution. It became a moment of confrontation with reality, where legal strategy, emotional strain, and public scrutiny all intersected. Every element — the judge's authority, the structured negotiation process, the uncertainty of outcomes, and the imbalance in perceived legal strength — combined to create an environment that was both intensely pressurized and deeply consequential. For Blake Lively in particular, it represented a moment of profound vulnerability, where the risks extended beyond the courtroom into the realm of personal reputation and long-term career stability, highlighting just how unforgiving and complex high-profile litigation can truly be.
This external assessment placed Blake Lively in an increasingly precarious position, deepening her sense of isolation while amplifying the emotional weight she carried throughout the proceedings. Despite the mandatory nature of the settlement conference, legal experts widely agreed that an immediate resolution was unlikely. Attorneys Ron Zambrano and Greg Dow pointed to the powerful role of ego and pride on both sides, suggesting that neither party appeared to compromise at this stage. Instead of a swift agreement, they anticipated a more drawn-out process in which the judge might first address the core legal issues through a summary judgment ruling. Such a decision, particularly if it weakened or dismissed Lively's claims, would serve as a decisive and public validation of the concerns that had been raised about the strength of her case. Only after such a ruling, they argued, would a meaningful path toward settlement realistically emerge. Until that moment arrived, Lively faced the difficult burden of navigating both the looming threat of legal defeat and the ongoing uncertainty surrounding the case's outcome. This prolonged ambiguity, combined with relentless public scrutiny, intensified the psychological strain, ensuring that the emotional turbulence surrounding the dispute would not subside anytime soon. Legal analysts proposed that if her claims were significantly undermined, a carefully structured settlement could offer a strategic way to protect her public image. By framing any resolution as a response to judicial findings rather than a personal concession, she could potentially preserve some degree of reputational stability. However, such a strategy would require careful orchestration, underscoring not only the fragility of her legal position but also the immense pressure she faced in managing both legal and public narratives simultaneously. Even with such a strategy in place, a critical question remained unresolved. Why would Justin Baldoni agree to settle under those circumstances? Having endured public accusations and a prolonged legal battle, his motivation for full vindication, both legally and personally, could outweigh any incentive to offer Lively a graceful exit. His apparent confidence and refusal to yield suggested a willingness to see the process through, even if it meant extending the conflict. This dynamic introduced a deeply human element into the proceedings, where personal conviction and emotional investment could override purely strategic considerations. For those closely connected, including Ryan Reynolds, the situation likely brought mounting frustration and stress, as the possibility of a prolonged dispute became increasingly real. The interpersonal dimension of the conflict further complicated matters. While some initially speculated about the possibility of a private, direct conversation between Lively and Baldoni as a means of resolving their differences, this idea was quickly dismissed as unrealistic. The level of mistrust and tension between the parties, combined with the strict control exercised by their legal teams, made any such interaction highly improbable. Without the opportunity for genuine, unmediated dialogue, the dispute remained confined to a formal, procedural framework that reinforced division rather than reconciliation. Each legal step, rather than easing tensions, seemed to deepen the emotional and psychological divide. This convergence of legal complexity, personal grievance, and public exposure created an environment of intense pressure. Lively found herself under constant scrutiny, balancing the demands of her legal strategy with the need to protect her public image, all while managing the emotional toll of the situation. The case unfolded less like a routine legal dispute and more like a high-stakes drama, with every development playing out under the unforgiving spotlight of public attention. The refusal to settle, driven by a combination of confidence on one side and vulnerability on the other, ensured that the conflict would continue to escalate, prolonging the strain on everyone involved. As the proceedings moved forward, the atmosphere in and around the courtroom reflected the gravity of the moment. Lively maintained a composed exterior, her public demeanor carefully controlled, yet the tension surrounding her was unmistakable. Ryan Reynolds, standing alongside her, appeared to share in the strain, navigating the situation with visible restraint. In contrast, Baldoni projected calm confidence, supported by his wife Emily, and presenting a unified front that underscored his steady position. Their silence in front of the media spoke volumes, reflecting a calculated effort to maintain control over public perception while the legal battle unfolded behind closed doors. At the center of it all was the judge's deliberate strategy of withholding a ruling on key motions, a move that cast a shadow of uncertainty over the entire process. This calculated ambiguity forced both sides to confront the risks they faced, shaping every negotiation and decision. Each offer and counteroffer was made under the looming possibility of a decisive, judicial outcome that could dramatically alter the course of the case. Legal experts emphasized that this uncertainty was not accidental, but rather a powerful tool designed to push the parties toward a resolution, though whether that resolution would come voluntarily remained unclear. Ultimately, what was unfolding was far more than a procedural step toward settlement. It was a complex, high-pressure confrontation involving legal strategy, personal stakes, and public perception, all intertwined in a way that left little room for error. For Blake Lively, the situation represented a moment of profound vulnerability, where every decision carried the potential for lasting consequences. The path forward remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: the stakes were extraordinarily high, and the outcome would resonate far beyond the confines of the courtroom. Blake Lively's claims, particularly those centered on harassment, were increasingly characterized by legal observers as weak and vulnerable to dismissal, a perception that significantly shaped the trajectory of the case. This assessment not only cast doubt on the viability of her legal strategy, but also reinforced Justin Baldoni's resolve, giving him little incentive to pursue compromise. From his perspective, the legal landscape appeared to favor patience over concession, strengthening his confidence that the court might ultimately validate his position. As a result, the possibility of an early settlement seemed remote, with both ego and the pressures of public perception complicating every potential path toward resolution. Negotiating under such conditions, as experts noted, becomes extraordinarily difficult, particularly when one party continues to pursue a favorable outcome that appears increasingly uncertain. The environment surrounding the settlement conference reflected this tension in every respect. What was intended as a procedural opportunity for resolution instead became a convergence point for legal strategy, personal pride, and image management, all unfolding under intense public scrutiny. For Lively, the stakes extended far beyond the courtroom. She was not only confronting the potential collapse of her claims, but also the prospect of prolonged exposure in the public eye, where every development risked amplifying reputational damage. Meanwhile, Baldoni's refusal to settle underscored a position of strength, intensifying the pressure on Lively and her legal team as the imbalance between the parties became more pronounced. The structure of the settlement process itself further entrenched this divide. Conducted as a form of federal shuttle diplomacy, the negotiations were mediated entirely by a magistrate judge who moved between separate rooms, relaying demands and counter-offers. This setup eliminated any possibility of direct communication, emphasizing the depth of the conflict and reinforcing the emotional and strategic distance between the parties. Even the brief joint session mandated at the outset, where